There was a time, and there was a place where poverty was just a rumor. A ghost story you read about in history books. It was a paradise where people were so wealthy, they became legendary in Miami shopping malls. They had a famous catchphrase when they traveled. They never asked for the price. They just pointed at the most expensive TVs, the finest jewelry, and said, "Dame Doss, give me two." That wasn't Saudi Arabia. That wasn't Switzerland. That was Venezuela. Back then, this nation was the envy of the Western Hemisphere. Their currency was so strong it was called the Latin American dollar. Blue-collar workers drove cars that European doctors could only dream of. They sat on top of the largest oil reserves on the planet. They thought the party would last forever. They thought God was a Venezuelan, but God left the building. Welcome to 2024. Look closely at your screen. You won't believe it, but this is the same glamorous street you imagined 30 seconds ago. But now, the Cadillacs are gone. The luxury is gone, replaced by garbage trucks filled with hungry people fighting for scraps. Here, money isn't used to buy food. Money is used to start fires for warmth because burning cash is cheaper than buying firewood. Here, a single pack of antibiotics is worth more than a human life. You go to sleep on Monday with a middle-class fortune, and you wake up on Tuesday with nothing. Not even enough to buy a loaf of bread. Look at this man. Let's call him Carlos. 30 years ago, Carlos was a top-tier heart surgeon in the capital. He saved thousands of lives. He had the big house, the sports car, the summer vacations in Paris. Today, Carlos is sitting on a curb, selling loose cigarettes one by one just to trade for a handful of rice. He wasn't destroyed by a bomb. He wasn't a victim of an earthquake or a tsunami. Carlos is the victim of something much more terrifying. An economic assassination. What happened to Venezuela wasn't an accident. It wasn't bad luck. This is a crime scene that was meticulously staged over 2 decades. How do you delete 80% of an economy without dropping a single missile? How do you turn the oil capital of the world into a place where people have to drink sewage water to survive? Today, we are not just reading the news. We are performing an autopsy. We are going to dissect every lie, every mistake, and every delusion that dragged Carlos and 30 million others straight into a living hell. Because if you think this can't happen to your country, if you think this can't happen to your life savings, you are dead wrong. This is the story of the economy that nailed a nation to the cross. And this is the final verdict. To understand why Carlos, that brilliant heart surgeon, ended up selling cigarettes on a street corner, we have to rewind the tape. We have to go back to the moment before the car crashed. Picture a Saturday afternoon in 1998. Carlos is standing in the backyard of his villa in Caracas. The smell of barbecue ribs is drifting through the air. Salsa music is playing from a brand new stereo system. Carlos is holding a cold beer, watching his kids play in the private pool. In that moment, life wasn't just good. It was perfect. And why wouldn't it be? Every time Carlos filled up his sports car, the gas was cheaper than a bottle of water. You heard that right. In Venezuela, gasoline was practically free. That is the perk of being born sitting on top of a majestic ocean of black gold. Under Carlos's feet, buried deep in the earth, were 300 billion barrels of proven oil reserves. That number is hard to wrap your head around. It is the largest stash on planet Earth. Bigger than the Saudis. Bigger than the United States. It was a geological winning lottery ticket that Mother Nature gave specifically to this country. On paper, every single Venezuelan, from the newborn baby to the grandmother, should have been a millionaire. But here is the dirty little secret of economics that nobody tells you. Oil is a jealous god. When the government took the wheel, they didn't just inherit a country. They inherited a massive money printer. And just like a lottery winner who never learned how to manage a bank account, they started spending money like tomorrow would never come. This is where we have to talk about something called the Dutch disease. Now, don't let the academic name scare you. Let me explain it to you like we are sitting at a bar. Imagine you win $100 million tomorrow. Suddenly, going to your 9-to-5 job feels stupid. Why would you sweat in your garden growing tomatoes when you can just import the best tomatoes from Italy? Why would you make your own clothes when you can fly to Paris and buy Gucci? So, you quit your job, you bulldoze your garden, you forget how to work, you only do one thing, you write checks. Venezuela did exactly that. When the oil money flooded in like a tsunami, their currency became super strong. Importing foreign goods became laughably cheap. Why grow corn in Venezuela when buying it from Brazil costs pennies? Why build factories when you can import Toyotas? Bit by bit, the factories in Venezuela closed down. The farms were abandoned. Weeds grew over the fertile fields. The entire nation stopped producing. They stopped working. They just pumped oil, sold it, and used that cash to buy everything else from the rest of the world. Carlos and millions of others enjoyed the party. They didn't realize they were cutting off their own legs. They were getting addicted, hooked on cheap imports. But here is the catch. To run a massive oil industry, you don't just need luck. You need brains. You need the best engineers in the world. You need geologists. You need people like Carlos. But the new government didn't like smart people. They liked obedient people. In a moment of ego that will go down in history as a fatal mistake, the government fired nearly 20,000 employees from the state oil company. 20,000 of the brightest minds in the country were kicked out the door. The reason? Because they went on strike. Because they dared to have an opinion. And who replaced them? Political loyalists. People who knew how to chant slogans very loudly, but had no idea how to maintain a high-pressure subterranean gas pipe. Think about it this way. You are flying on a jumbo jet at 30,000 feet. Suddenly the pilot is thrown out of the cockpit. And the person replacing him is a guy who has never flown a plane, but he is really good at complimenting the airline owner. Would you stay on that plane? Venezuela stayed on that plane. Under the management of amateurs, the infrastructure began to rot. Pumps rusted. Pipelines leaked. Oil production started to nosedive. But nobody cared. Because the global price of oil was at an all-time high, over $100 a barrel. The cash was still flowing in fast enough to hide the cracks in the wall. Maduro treated the state oil company not like a business, but like a personal ATM. Need money for a massive political rally. Take it from the oil company. Need cash to buy the loyalty of the military generals. Take it from the oil company. Maintenance budget. Delete it. Who needs maintenance when we are rich? They killed the golden goose. They plucked it, deep-fried it, ate it at a drunken party, and then acted surprised when it stopped laying eggs. And then, the day of reckoning arrived. The year was 2014. Like every financial nightmare, it happened fast. The global price of oil crashed. From the peak of $100, it free fell into the abyss. Suddenly, the ATM ran out of cash. Remember Carlos in his backyard. Now, imagine the barbecue grill is repossessed. The sports car is out of gas. And most importantly, there is no money left to import food. Because Venezuela had stopped farming years ago, when the dollars dried up, the supermarkets went empty overnight. No flour, no milk, no medicine. A nation of lottery winners suddenly woke up in the middle of a desert with empty pockets. And the worst part was, they had forgotten how to plant the seeds to feed themselves. The curse was real. The party was over. Carlos. But instead of admitting the mistake and tightening the belt, the government chose a solution that was worse than death. A solution that would turn poverty into a humanitarian catastrophe. They looked at the money printer in the central bank, and they smiled. When the money ran out, the government decided to print more. It sounds like a simple solution, doesn't it? If you need money, just make more money. But economics has a law of gravity, and gravity is unforgiving. This brings us to the most terrifying chapter. The death of the currency, and with it the death of dignity. Let's go back to Carlos. Remember, this man was a respected surgeon. He was used to precise calculations. He was used to order. But in 2015, his world turned into a mathematical hallucination. Hyperinflation. It is a cold academic word. But let me tell you what it feels like. Imagine walking into a grocery store. It is 9 a.m. You pick up a carton of milk. The price tag says 1,000 bolivars. You realize you forgot your wallet in the car. You run out, grab your wallet, and come back. It is now 9:15 a.m. You pick up that same carton of milk. The price is now 2,000 bolivars. In 15 minutes, your money lost half of its soul. Prices didn't change by the year. They didn't even change by the month. They changed while you were standing in line. Waiters in restaurants stopped giving out menus with prices, because by the time you finished your appetizer, the price of the steak had doubled. This wasn't just inflation. This was economic velocity that broke the speedometer. At its peak, inflation hit 130,000%. Let me put that number in perspective for you. Imagine you buy a cup of coffee today for $5. Next week, that same cup of coffee costs $6,000. By the end of the month it costs $1 million. The currency, the bolivar, became literally worthless. It was cheaper to use the bills as napkins to wipe your mouth than to buy actual napkins with them. People started weaving purses and hats out of the cash because the craft value was higher than the face value. We saw images that looked like fiction. People carrying backpacks full of cash just to buy a hot dog. Weighing money on scales instead of counting it because counting took too long. But for Carlos, this wasn't funny. It was humiliating. His life savings, 30 years of hard work in the operating room, evaporated in weeks. His retirement fund, which was supposed to let him travel the world, now couldn't even buy a set of tires for his old car. He watched his bank account turn into a meaningless string of zeros. He was a millionaire on paper, but a beggar in reality. And when the money dies, trust dies. Society is built on a simple promise, that if I work today I can eat tomorrow. Majuro took that promise and set it on fire. This is the moment the brain drain began. The Great Escape. You see, when a country collapses, the first people to leave are not the poor. It is the people who have options. The doctors, the engineers, the architects, the professors. They looked at their future in Venezuela and saw a black hole. So they packed their bags. Carlos watched his colleagues disappear one by one. The hospital where he worked started to feel like a ghost town. The operating rooms were empty not because there were no patients, but because there were no surgeons. Nearly 8 million people fled the country. That is 25% of the population. Imagine if everyone in Texas just stood up and walked away. But those who stayed, like Carlos, faced a new enemy. An enemy older than money. Hunger. In 2016, a dark joke started circulating on the streets of Caracas. They called it the Majuro diet. The punchline was cruel. It gets you skinny, but it doesn't make you fit. But it wasn't a diet. It was starvation on a national scale. According to university studies, in a single year, the average Venezuelan lost 19 pounds of body weight. Think about that. 19 pounds. That is not fat. That is muscle. That is bone density. That is the body eating itself to survive. The shelves in the supermarkets were bare. And if a truck with rice or pasta showed up, it turned into a war zone. We saw videos of civilized people, teachers and grandmothers, fighting with their bare hands over a bag of flour. We saw people hunting dogs and cats in the street. We saw children picking through garbage bags outside of restaurants, competing with vultures for a rotting piece of chicken. Carlos, the man who used to dine in Paris, found himself skipping dinner so his children could eat. He found himself trading his surgical watch for a few kilos of beans. The government weaponized this hunger. They created the clap box, a subsidized box of food delivered to your door. But there was a catch. If you protested against Majuro, no box for you. If you didn't vote for the party, no box for you. They turned food into a leash. They turned starvation into a tool of control. But the horror didn't stop at the stomach. It reached into the darkness. The infrastructure collapse. Remember those 20,000 engineers they fired years ago? Well, the consequences finally arrived. The electrical grid, neglected for decades, began to die. In March 2019, the lights went out. Not for an hour, not for a day, but for a week. The entire country plunged into darkness. No internet, no cell service, no water pumps. Imagine a city of millions in the tropics, 90 degrees Fahrenheit, with no air conditioning and no running water. People were scooping water from the Guaire River, a river so polluted it is basically liquid sewage, just to flush their toilets. But the true nightmare was in the hospitals. This is where Carlos broke. Imagine standing in a neonatal intensive care unit. You are surrounded by incubators keeping premature babies alive. And then, click, the power cuts. The backup generators don't work because the parts were stolen, and the fuel was siphoned off. Silence. The only sound you hear is the crying of mothers in the dark. Doctors tried to pump air into the baby's lungs by hand. They worked for hours until their arms gave out. But they couldn't save them all. We will never know the exact death toll of those 5 days of darkness. But Carlos knows. He remembers the faces. He remembers the feeling of helplessness. A surgeon with a scalpel but no light. A healer in a world that wanted to die. This was the moment the economy stopped being about numbers on a spreadsheet. This was the moment it became a physical threat to life. The state had failed to provide the two most basic things a civilization needs: light and water. Carlos realized then that his country wasn't just poor, it was broken. The social contract was torn to shreds. He looked at his hands, the hands that used to save lives, and he realized they were useless against a system that didn't care if its people lived or died. He realized that staying meant dying. Not a quick death, but a slow, humiliating erosion of everything that made him human. So, he did what millions of others did. He looked north. He looked towards the jungle. He looked towards the Darien Gap. But before we follow him on that journey, we have to uncover the darkest layer of this collapse. Because while Carlos was starving, while the babies were dying in the dark, a select group of people were popping champagne. While the country burned, a new economy was rising from the ashes. A criminal economy. If you stop eating for 3 days, something changes in your brain. The part of you that cares about art, about politics, about politeness, it shuts down. The part of you that is an animal, the lizard brain, wakes up. It has only one command: survive. This is part 4. The zombification of a society. Let's go back to the streets of Caracas in 2017. Carlos, our surgeon, is walking home. But he is not walking like a doctor anymore. He is walking with his head down, conserving energy. His eyes are scanning the ground. Not looking for money, looking for scraps. He passes by a restaurant. In the back alley, the waiters are bringing out the black garbage bags. In a normal country, garbage is waste. In Venezuela, garbage became a resource. Suddenly, shadows emerge from the darkness. It is not just the homeless. It is men in suits. It is former school teachers. It is grandmothers. They descend on the bags. They tear them open with a desperation that would make you look away in shame. Carlos watches a man fight a stray dog for a chicken bone. And then he realizes with horror that he is jealous of the dog. This is what we call the Maduro diet. It was a dark joke on the streets, but the reality was a biological catastrophe. The average Venezuelan lost 19 pounds in a single year. But they didn't just lose fat. They lost the energy to revolt. You see, you cannot fight a revolution on an empty stomach. When you are starving, you don't dream of democracy. You dream of bread. And the government knew this. They didn't just accidentally cause the famine. They weaponized it. Enter the clap box. It stands for Local Committees for Supply and Production. It sounds bureaucratic and boring. But in reality, it was the most effective tool of psychological torture ever invented in Latin America. Here is how it worked. Since the supermarkets were empty, the government became the only dealer in town. They started delivering these cardboard boxes directly to households. Inside, you would find rice, pasta, oil, and powdered milk. On the surface, it looks like humanitarian aid. But open the box. The milk powder wasn't milk. Analysis showed it was a chemical mix from Mexico that had almost zero calcium and was full of sodium. It wasn't designed to nourish you. It was designed to keep you just alive enough to vote. And here is the catch. The box wasn't for everyone. Every street had a watcher. A political spy for the party. If you posted something bad about Maduro on Facebook, no box for you. If you didn't sign the petition against US sanctions, no box for you. If you were caught marching in a protest, no box for you. They turned food into a weapon. They turned hunger into a leash. Carlos had children. His children were crying from hunger pains in the middle of the night. So, what did Carlos do? He swallowed his pride. He took down his anti-government posters. He signed the loyalty card. He stood in line for 8 hours under the scorching sun, humiliated, just to receive a box of fake milk and low-grade rice. The government broke his spirit not with a baton, but with a cardboard box. This is the zombification. It is when you force a free man to kneel for a crumb of bread. But the horror goes deeper. When the economy evaporates, strange markets emerge from the shadows. People didn't have money, but they had bodies. We saw hair salons filling up not with customers wanting a haircut, but with women selling their hair. Beautiful, long dark hair, cut off and sold for wig makers in Colombia, just to buy diapers. We saw the rise of the blood market. People crossing the border into Colombia to sell their plasma. Selling the literal life force in their veins because it was the only liquid asset they had left. Society began to eat itself. Crime changed too. In the past, thieves would steal your wallet or your phone. Now, they would steal your grocery bag. Imagine walking out of a bakery with a loaf of bread and feeling the same adrenaline as if you were carrying a bag of diamonds. You look over your shoulder. You run home. Because in a starving nation, bread is more valuable than gold. And then, just when you thought it couldn't get more surreal, the landscape shifted again. The Twilight Zone. By 2019, the government realized it couldn't print any more money. The Bolivar was dead. So, Maduro did the unthinkable. The socialist leader, who spent years screaming Yankee go home, quietly allowed the US dollar to circulate. Suddenly, a new type of store appeared. They were called bodegons. Picture this. Carlos is walking down a street that smells of sewage and rotting trash. He is wearing shoes with holes in them. And right there, in the middle of the ruin, is a shiny, glass-fronted store. It looks like a spaceship from another planet. Inside, the air conditioning is blasting, the lights are bright, and the shelves are filled with Nutella from Italy, Pringles from America, Kirkland vitamins from Costco, champagne from France, 85-inch flat-screen TVs. It was a hallucination, but there was a barrier. You couldn't pay with bolivars. You needed dollars. Greenbacks. Venezuela split into two separate species, the dollar people and the zombie people. If you were a general, a government crony, or a drug trafficker, you lived in the bodegons. You ate imported steaks and drank whiskey. You lived in a bubble of luxury that floated above the misery. But for Carlos, and for 95% of the population, these stores were museums. He would stand outside the glass, watching people buy a jar of peanut butter that cost more than his entire monthly pension. He felt like a ghost haunting his own city. He was dead to the economy. He was invisible. This creates a specific type of psychological trauma. It is one thing to starve when everyone else is starving. It is a shared tragedy, but to starve while watching a Mercedes-Benz pull up to a store selling Belgian chocolate just a few feet away, that breeds a different kind of monster. It breeds pure, cold hopelessness. The social fabric didn't just tear, it dissolved. Neighbors stopped trusting neighbors. Was he a spy for the clap box? Does he have dollars? Is he hiding food? The community died. And in its place, millions of isolated individuals were left wandering the ruins, focused on only one thing. The next meal. Carlos looked at his hands again. These hands used to fix hearts. Now they were trembling. Not from age, but from the realization that he had become part of the walking dead. He knew he had only one card left to play. The most dangerous card of all. Escape. But to leave he would have to cross the hell of the Darien Gap. And to do that, he would need money. And since he had no money, he would have to enter the dark economy. The criminal economy that had replaced the state. What happens when a government runs out of honest money? Usually, they fall. They lose the support of the army. The people rise up. The leader flees to an island in the Caribbean. That is the script we are used to seeing in history books. But Venezuela threw that script into the shredder. Because when the oil rigs rusted shut, and the tax money dried up, the regime didn't collapse. They didn't panic. They simply changed their business model. They stopped being a government. And they became a cartel. This is part 5. The criminal state. Let's go back to the map. Look at the southern part of Venezuela. The Amazon. For centuries, this was a protected paradise. Home to indigenous tribes, ancient forests and biodiversity that exists nowhere else on Earth. It was the lungs of the continent. But in 2016, desperate for cash, Maduro looked at this green paradise and saw only one thing. An ATM machine. He signed a decree creating the Orinoco mining arc, a zone larger than the entire country of Portugal. And he said to the world, come and dig. But he didn't invite legitimate mining companies with safety standards. He opened the doors to the underworld. Suddenly, the jungle was filled with armed groups. Guerrillas from Colombia like the ELN, criminal syndicates, and overseeing it all, the Venezuelan military. They weren't mining for copper or iron. They were hunting for the blood of the economy. Gold. But this isn't the gold mining you see on Discovery Channel. This is the Wild West. They use mercury. Tons and tons of toxic liquid mercury. They pour it into the rivers to separate the gold from the dirt. Let me tell you what mercury does to a human body. It attacks the nervous system. It destroys your kidneys. It drives you mad. We saw indigenous children drinking from the rivers their ancestors protected for 1,000 years, and dying from poisoning. We saw the jungle turned into a moonscape of craters and mud. And where did the gold go? It didn't go to the national treasury. It didn't go to build schools or fix the power grid. It was loaded onto private jets, planes taking off in the middle of the night, flying to Turkey, to the UAE, to Iran. It was sold for cash. Cold, hard, untraceable cash. And that cash went straight back to the presidential palace. It was used to pay the generals. It was used to buy the loyalty of the men with guns. You see, Carlos the surgeon was starving because he relied on the formal economy. But the men in uniform were eating well because they were part of the extraction economy. But gold was just the side hustle. The real money, the billions, came from something much more addictive: cocaine. For years, U.S. investigators whispered about a shadow organization called the Cartel of the Suns. Why suns? Because in the Venezuelan military, the generals wear sun insignias on their epaulets instead of stars. The allegation was terrifying. That the Venezuelan military wasn't fighting drug trafficking. They were managing it. Imagine you are a drug lord in Mexico or Colombia. Your biggest problem is the police. You have to hide. You have to bribe. You have to build tunnels. Now imagine you can partner with the Venezuelan Air Force. Suddenly, you don't need tunnels. You have legitimate hangars. You don't need to hide from radar. You control the radar. Venezuela became the superhighway for drugs moving from South America to the US and Europe. And the generals took their cut. A massive cut. This explains the mystery that baffled political analysts for years. Why didn't the military overthrow Maduro when the country collapsed? Why did they stand by while their own families starved? The answer is brutal economics. If you are a general, and you overthrow Maduro, and a democratic government comes in, what happens? The border's close. The radar turns back on. The drug route dies. And you go to prison. But if you keep Maduro in power, the spice keeps flowing. Maduro made them partners in the crime. He made sure that if he went down, they would all go down. It was a suicide pact sealed with cocaine and gold. And this brings us back to the streets of Caracas. Back to those shiny stores called bodegons that we saw in the last chapter. Remember how confused Carlos was. Seeing a Ferrari dealership opening in a city with no water. Seeing luxury condos rising in a city where people were eating garbage. Now we know the truth. Those buildings weren't signs of economic recovery. They were washing machines. When you make billions from illegal gold and drugs, you can't just put it in a bank account. You have to clean it. You have to build a hotel. You have to open a chain of luxury grocery stores. You have to import Ferraris. The economy of Venezuela became a facade. Behind the glass of the luxury store was a mountain of dirty money. And standing outside the glass was Carlos. He looked at the new construction cranes in the sky, and for a moment, he felt hope. He thought, maybe the country is coming back. Maybe jobs are coming back. But then he realized the cruel joke. None of this was for him. He wasn't a citizen anymore. He was an obstacle. He was just a ghost haunting a laundromat run by gangsters. The state had not only failed him. The state had become his predator. By 2023, the transformation was complete. Venezuela was no longer a sovereign nation in the traditional sense. It was a criminal enterprise with a seat at the United Nations. It was a mafia that owned an army and an oil company. And Carlos knew, with absolute certainty, that there was no voting his way out of this. You cannot vote the mafia out of power. You cannot protest against a cartel that owns the bullets. The only vote he had left was with his feet. He packed a small backpack. He took the photo of his wife. He took his last few dollars. And he started walking. He walked past the rotting oil rigs. He walked past the shiny money laundering towers. He walked past the starving children. He walked towards the border. But as he left, he looked back one last time. Not with anger, but with a warning, because he knew that what happened here wasn't unique to Venezuela. He knew that the seeds of this disaster are being planted in other places. Maybe even in places that think they are safe. Places like your home. So, here we are at the end of the road. We have watched a nation commit suicide. We have seen the oil dry up. We have seen the money turn to dust. We have seen the zombies in the streets and the gangsters in the palaces. But there is one question left. The most important question of all. Why did I tell you this story? Why should you, sitting in your comfortable home in Texas, or London, or Sydney, care about a failed state in South America? Because Venezuela is not just a story about them. It is a story about us. It is easy to look at Maduro and say he is a monster. It is easy to look at the economic collapse and say it was just bad luck or bad management. But that is a comforting lie we tell ourselves to sleep better at night. The truth is terrifyingly simple. Venezuela was once exactly like us. They were the rich kid on the block. They were modern. They were educated. They thought their democracy was unbreakable. They thought their wealth was infinite. Carlos thought so too. I want you to look around your room right now. Look at your smartphone. Look at your refrigerator full of food. Look at the lights that turn on when you flip a switch. You think these things are guaranteed. You think they are your birthright. But they are not. Civilization is a thin layer of ice on a deep, dark ocean. And that ice is much thinner than you think. History teaches us that societies don't collapse overnight. They collapse slowly, like a leaking faucet. It starts with a politician telling you that your neighbor is your enemy. It starts with a government printing money to pay for things it cannot afford. It starts with the normalization of corruption. It starts when you stop trusting the truth. Do any of these things sound familiar to you? Do you see the cracks in your own ceiling? We live in a world that is addicted to debt. We live in a world where anger is the most profitable currency on social media. We live in a world where reality is becoming optional. Venezuela is the ghost of Christmas future. It is a warning scream from the future. It is telling us what happens when a society chooses comfortable lies over hard truths. But I promised you I would tell you what happened to Carlos. I found him. He is not in Caracas anymore. He survived the jungle. He survived the cartels. He survived the hunger. Today, Carlos lives in a small apartment in Miami. The hands that used to perform open-heart surgeries are now scrubbing grease off plates in the back of a restaurant. He works 12 hours a day washing dishes. He is tired. His back hurts. He has lost his home. He has lost his status. But when I spoke to him, he didn't ask for pity. He looked me in the eye and said something I will never forget. He said, "I lost my money. I lost my career. I lost my country. But for the first time in 10 years I can sleep. Because when I wake up tomorrow, I know the price of milk will be the same as it is today. I know that no one is going to arrest me for thinking the wrong thought." He taught me that freedom isn't free. It is fragile. It is a garden that you have to water every single day. And if you let the weeds take over, if you let the demagogues and the liars take over, the garden dies. So, what is the verdict? The verdict is that economics is not just about numbers. It is about morality. It is about the choices we make every day. You have a choice. You can close your eyes. You can scroll past this video. You can go back to believing that the party will last forever. Or, you can wake up. You can start asking questions. You can start demanding the truth. You can start preparing. If you want to be part of the solution, if you want to understand the machinery of the world before it breaks down, then you know what to do. Hit that subscribe button. Not because I need the numbers, but because we are building a community of people who refuse to be blind. We are going to explore the darkest corners of the global economy. We are going to find the stories that the news is too afraid to tell. Because the only way to avoid becoming Venezuela is to understand how Venezuela happened. My name is DarkCapital. And remember, the lights only stay on as long as we are willing to defend the switch.